Hey guys, I heard after the first video from some of you that you kind of understood Qubed Peas was a big deal, but you couldn't quite put your finger on why. I decided in this video to dive a little bit deeper into components and maybe even an example of how it might help you in your daily work. Today's video is going to be a little bit longer, but it's going to be a simple story, so hang in for the ride. We're going to show you how components helped one team get over their hurdles. You've heard me talk about components quite a bit by now, and I bet you're wondering exactly what they are or what I mean by that. In Qubed Peas, we call components pods, so you'll hear me using the word pod quite a bit. Pods are a self-contained unit that can be deployed as its own object or composited together with other objects, other components, other pods, to create products. It's really kind of an isolated, tiny little project environment for each one of your pieces of code. And that's where the real beauty comes in. Each pod or component has an API to it. Basically what you can tell it to do or what it tells you it has already done or what it's heard. Let's take a little example of that, something like a button in a browser. And you can hear when it's clicked and you can hear when the mouse goes over it and you can set the value and you can get the value so you know what the label is. Those kinds of things. That's its basic API. All that is just fancy talk for what I can tell it to do and what it can say back to me. In Qubed Peas, that's kind of an important aspect. How you describe your API. Once you get that down, everything else beyond that front door is yours. Let's take a look. All right, we work for a great company, you and me. And by the way, we don't really need anybody else, but for sake of this argument, we have a team of people that help us out. So you and I wrote this application inside of our company. It's got a simple list and some details. Depending upon what you pick on the list side is what shows up on the detail side. Really obvious stuff nowadays, but when we wrote it, oh my goodness. So okay, if we look into these objects, we wrote it in Qubed Peas, and we look inside of each one of these pods as components, we'll say, okay, let's go inside of the list pod and see what exactly is inside of this. Well, once you break it apart, you'll notice that it looks like a tiny little isolated project. It's got folders for CSS and JS and your HTML folders for templates and your test data, basically everything you would find in a traditional HTML application or JavaScript application. If you go inside of the other side, you'll see exactly the same thing, except its own files. And the interesting thing is both of these actually live inside of our patch. So your patch is basically your project workspace in Qubed Peas. And now we have a pod for the details and a pod for the list, but inside of them they have their own tiny little isolated and really quarantined environments. And that's really where the power comes in. Qubed Peas is quite a bit different in this aspect in that it tries to isolate where you write code. Remember that focus we were talking about in the first video? This is where that comes from. If you're doing work on the list, all you have to think about is the list, because the only thing that's near you are files that deal with the list, application parts that deal with the list. If you work on the detail side, same thing. We can suddenly have two different teams working on their own without having to worry about impacting one another. And that's really where that idea of focus comes from, is as long as you pass your tests, you can come out and say, I'm ready for release. No one else has to question whether or not your parts will affect what they've already written. Okay, back to our company. So our company thought that we were awesome. The first thing they said was, this would be better if I could do more stuff if I logged in. Yeah, that sounds reasonable. That sounds great, but that sounded like a large ask for us. We talked a little bit in the company and found Tony, who works on the user team, who was more than willing to come down and try to help us out. He wrote the real login system for our company for the website. So this should be a breeze. Problem is, Tony doesn't know anything about our project. You can just hear it. All the developers sitting in the room going, oh yeah, great, we got more resources, but we got to train him up. It's going to take me a long time. Everything Tony checks in, I've got to check. Even though he's a really good developer, I don't know if he knows our environment. We've all been through that meeting. All of those problems that you typically find on a web team exist, right? But not with Qubed Peas. You remember that tiny isolated project we were talking about, those pods? We scratched our heads for a second and said, why don't we just give Tony a pod and call it Login View? That sounded like a good idea. So we designed this little space that Tony could work in, and just Tony could work in, where he didn't have to know anything about our project. And in fact, we didn't have to know anything about his. It did live in our project. So it was really our resource. But it was as if it was its own world. And that's the beauty. That's where Tony's focus came from. So Tony set off, came back 2 weeks later, and said, congratulations, guys. You now have a login system. Man, it was fantastic. It was awesome. Then we had that next meeting, which is where all the developers get in the room and start complaining about, I've got to figure out what Tony wrote, figure out how to load his files into our part of the project. We have to define what part of the system it should lay into. I'm going to have to write some bootstrap mechanism to be able to use it. Not on Qubed Peas. I think you're seeing the trend here. With Qubed Peas, it's already there. It's a component, just like a Dropbox in the browser is a component. It's just there. All we had to do is go to our patch viewer, which is just your graphical project manager with Qubed Peas, and say, checkbox, I want to use that login system. That's it. Well, that was fantastic. In no time, we had login out the door. Our customers loved us. But the problem with that is they came back not much longer and said, no, a lot of our customers use Google. How about if we let them log in with Google? All right, well, we don't have time to do this. Tony did great with that last login system, and well, let's give this back to Tony. Bring him back on the team, throw him back into that little pod where he's completely isolated and can focus on his work, can't impact us, and more importantly, we can't impact him. He can take as long as he wants. We can keep shipping our product until he's finished. That's a good idea. We brought Tony back. In no time, Tony had Google in there. Wow. Okay, so we deployed this, and our customers actually were mailing us $100 bills. It's pretty awesome. Now we have this great login system that allows you to log in with Google and allows that login system to be used anywhere in any part of our system at any time with one line of code because it's a component, just like a Dropbox. Wow, that's fantastic. The problem is the rest of the company caught wind of this. And they said, we want to use Google. We're logging in and all over the places. We're not using our customers now can go to your system and log in with Google, and they can't in ours. That's not okay. We've got to figure that out. You know, this would have been a really good idea if we would have told Tony to create his own patch and write this login system as its own project so that he would be able to distribute it to anyone, anywhere. That sounds like a real reasonable way to go. Maybe we should look at our patch and figure out if we can tear Tony's stuff out so that it's not specific to our app. Hey, wait a second. It's not specific to our application. In fact, Tony didn't know anything about our application. That's right. That tiny isolated project, the thing we call a pod, that's saving our bacon again. Cool. Let's go see what we can do. Walk back into your patch viewer. There's a wonderful little button that says pack. Oh, I want to go to Tony's little object and pack it. And what packing is in Qubed Peas is a way to create a distributable object. And that sounds real fancy, but really what it means is package up just that little bit of code. So if you want to deploy one little pod as a product, you can do it. Because that's how pods are used already inside of Qubed Peas, is little pieces of code. So to deploy it to a third party at any time is very, very simple. You just pack it up, you give one set of files to them, they're done. They have one line of code, just like you only had one line of code to put it into our system. They have one line of code to put it into theirs and start using it. All they have to do is listen to when Tony says, hey, somebody logged in. And they're off to the races. All of a sudden, our website explodes. Maybe not such a good thing, but explodes, and everybody's happy, and we make tons of money, and we live in the Bahamas or I don't know, New York, or I don't know. We live somewhere really, really cool that we really like to live, and when we don't like to live there, we live somewhere else. And there's a lot of money. So, there you have it. Qubed Peas can make you a lot of money. No, that's not, I might have gotten off the point. So what I was really trying to illustrate is these pods, these little pockets of isolated projects that are all throughout your current project. Save your bacon. That makes it entirely isolated when you work on any component. So that's a good example of how we use pods or components in Qubed Peas, and kind of what it might mean to your project. But really, it's time to get our fingers deep into some code. Head on to the next video to see how to get everything installed. It's really easy, by the way. And then the next video, which is Hello World. Who can wait for that?